November, 6th of November.
They jumped him.
They said they'd head down and get him, and the fellow that was with him ran mad home. But they were two big powerful men. One of them stood in the miners' gate, so still there, and he grabbed the horse's head, and the other fellow swept him out of the trap before he could draw his pistol. He was only a small, puny fellow anyway.
Yeah.
And they broke the spade in his head, killed him, and they took away the iron part of the spade, so that would be identified, and they left the handle there. And they gave the pony a slap, and he went off up the road to the entrance to the avenue up to the miner's big house on the cliff edge.
Did they leave the body there?
Oh, they left the body there. And his two sisters were living with him. They missed him at about 7
It
or
stuck
8
up the
o'clock.
top.
So they missed him at 7 or 8 o'clock, so they got a fella called Harty to organise a search. They went along with lanterns inside the fences and they found him.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
And next morning there was a meeting convened of all the Protestant celebrities or aristocrats of the parish and of Waterford. Lord Stewart the Dacious put up £200.
What, to put up a
A
reward?
reward, yeah. And Lord Stewart the Dacious put up €200 or £200.
That's money.
Sterling.
Money at the
Oh,
time.
they put up,
Sure, the die was cast in
and
that
all-
stage then. The die was cast in.
all the Protestant names, Charnley and
Yeah.
these people, the Odells, Countess de Freeney's great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather,
Sorry,
Put up
I'll be out to you now.
£20. There was £984 off it.
Yeah.
And there were 6,000 people living in Old Parish at that time, all speaking Irish. And Old Parish was flooded with English agents, but no one would give away. I always said to Kevin, his brother that I was writing the thing from, that it was like a fellow kill a Sioux Indian and he'd go into the reservation and try and find out who killed someone. No one would give away. That was nearly £500,000.
It's an awful heap of money, like.
And there were the 2 days they lived there and they stayed on there, and one of them would go into Dungarvan and he'd come up through the square in Dungarvan and he'd be drunk and he'd raise up his right hand and he'd shout out, Sinead Lava Varrigan Vina, that's the hand that killed the miner. And they'd pull him in and he'd say he was only joking, drunk.
So they never pinned it on him, so?
No, the 2 brothers, they went off to America after 2 years. They
Was there something about it?
couldn't stand the strain.
Was there something about an encounter with a priest then in America?
Oh, that was it, yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
that's what-
Is he recording?
Yeah, that's the whole
Oh,
purpose.
yeah. Which one was that?
I wonder what castle was that in your Almighty?
What?
I wonder what
That,
castle.
that castle there that's made, or it looks like it's 700 or 800 years old there, right in the middle. It's old.
Tynes
old
Castle.
Tynes Castle.
Tynes Castle, yeah.
That was belonged to the Welshes, it says in the plaque there.
Yeah.
His family, there was another branch of the Welsh family from Kilkenny. One of the Yahal branch had a swan with the arrow up through its beak, and the Kilkenny branch had as their plaque or their emblem, the swan with the arrow down through the back of its head. They were big landlords. So. Anyway, they put a stop to his evictions.
So anyway, seeing as we started to talk about aristocracy.
Immortal.
No, but the Odells, what was that story about Odell, the guy who didn't know whether he was dead or alive?
Catherine Odell, she was the daughter of Gerald Odell of Carrigley, the big estates down there in Dungarvan. She sent her son, she married a guy called Fitzgerald from the other side of the Blackwater. He brought Ballinapparker House
Yeah, they would have been
into
the
the
Fitzgeralds who
family.
came at the time of the Norman invasion. Yeah.
She had a son and a daughter.
That's Ballinapparker House up by Agnish, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This daughter, the daughter was, she was all right, but Odie was sent off to school in England, to Harrow or Eton or somewhere. Probably got a damp bit or something. He got some kind of meningitis anyway. So he was a bit simple. And he'd be going around to Tinkers, Mikey Fitz told me one time.
He was a judge,
Which
he was
wasn't
going
the thing
selling
for
fish.
a landlord's the son to be doing, like, you know. Anyway, he died about 28 years of age, 29. You can see his headstone above there, just inside the top gate of the graveyard. And his mother was heartbroken, of course, and she didn't want to bury. She couldn't accept that he was dead. And a lot of people used to be buried alive in those days, about 1890. So she kept the coffin lying in the open grave for 3 weeks. And 3 or more men taking 8-hour shifts for 3 weeks, being sent up, drink and food.
And would they been paid or just be kept?
Bob Drohan, I knew him as an old man, and Jack Bryan's father. Jack Bryan was living in the thatched house here,
Yeah.
but his father, and some other Ardmore, I don't know who it was. And she paid him for 3 weeks before she covered the grave.
In case he'd break up.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah,
It wasn't
that's
unusual.
square up at you afterwards.
More water.
Now, Mike, you've seen it. If you'd changed, you were born on the side of the street here, but we kind of grew up together. But there's been big changes in Ardmore in the intervening years.
Actually, there was a family in every house in the village, on the side of the street, on both sides of the street. There was nowadays, when a house comes up, when a family dies out, the Ardmore people can't afford.
Yeah.
They can't afford a house anywhere in Ardmore.
There was a good few businesses. I mean, your mother had a very
My
successful.
mother had a half shop, half pub. And Rooney's had a half shop, half pub. Miss Tobin had a shop above the top of the
Oh,
street.
that's right, Maureen was above it.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Where was that one, Michael?
Where John Quinn is
Windsor.
now.
Yeah.
That was
was
now the
totally
only shop.
Liam Giblin told me one time that he was selling vegetables for Lynch's in Dungarvan, and as if poor Maureen wasn't enough of a slave above with Miss Tobin, she was closed at lunchtime. But Liam was in a hurry one day and he kept banging on the door, and here was Miss Tobin sitting down regally like that, and Maureen down with a basin of water and a scrubbing brush, and she's scrubbing her toes.
Yeah.
Christ help us. But you'd have a lot of people coming up then after Mass, Michael. Would they be looking for a,
Oh yeah. Well,
apart from the newspapers, they'd be looking for a bit of liquid refreshments
Yeah, but-
wrapped inside in the newspaper.
as far as I remember, there was you couldn't
Baby
open a
powers.
pub on Sunday to anyone in those days, except that he was 3 miles away from the village.
Oh, that's right.
A traveller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, often I remember going to the door when I'd be 7 or 8 years of age, the knocker coming Sunday night, and of course there'd be people inside playing cards around the round table in our sitting room, and the same crowd every Sunday night. But you'd ask who's there, and they'd say a traveller, and I'd say, I'd recognise the voice, and I'd say, you're not 3 miles away. But anyway, I'd go in and ask my father, and depending on whether my father asked him or liked him or
yeah.
not. Oh, leave him in. He'd usually say, leave him in. And that was the law. It dated from the old days of horse travel,
Yes,
and horse
yeah.
and carriage travel, that if you had a journey of 3 miles made by horseback or in a carriage or on some sort of horse and cart, you were entitled to sustenance as what an inn, and the pubs are kind of designated.
Pubs are getting that.
That was
yes,
under
no.
English law, of course.
Yeah, but on a kind of a local level, if you don't necessarily want to name the names, but some of the local women on their way up from church, when they collect the paper, when they collected
Oh yeah, well I was selling papers, and I suppose, should I mention names?
should be no harm. I
You
won't.
must. You have to
I-
mention the names.
Yeah, I won't use anything that I think would be in any way.
All right,
Yeah,
well
right.
Mrs. Mokler, she was the wife of the sacristan down in the church, and she'd come in to me before 8:45 on her way down to Mass maybe, and she'd say, give me a fiver and say, give me the paper, and put a naggin of whiskey wrapped up in it and slip it out to me over the counter. So I know, and Jimmy Neal, when Jimmy Neal died, his wife was used to taking his naggin of whiskey out of his pocket when he'd go home with a bit of drinking and fall into bed. And she was the pride of that, so she'd come into me and say the same thing, give me another fiver and say, wrap the newspaper in that, Julian Neal.
Yeah, I know.
You know, sure.
Actually, I remember the time there
You'll
was.
drive me out, you'll get me in real trouble with Edward and people like
I know, sure, Christ, I'm in trouble already, but I mean, because I was working on a
that. Not
false.
using names.
No, I was this is only for personal stuff, but I was on a false scheme and I put up a kind of a. We came on a stash.
Hello, folks. How
Hello,
are you?
Bea.
We're making you
Can
famous.
Can you freeze it for a sec? Yeah. Get back. Are you okay? Jimmy Neal, there'd been a health program on the night before, and it said like if you ever came across somebody half drowned or something, don't do and try and revive them, or if somebody in a car crash or if somebody fell off a bike. So Jimmy Neal was going home, and they'd never go home without a kind of a stash for the morning. It wasn't a baby powder, what would you call it?
naggin.
A naggin.
That's about a
They did the
5
naggin anyway, Jimmy was cycling home.
2 and 3/4 glasses.
Past Johnny Crawford's cottage outside, and he got a kind of a head stagger on the bike and he fell off. So whoever came across him, obeying what they'd seen on television, they decided to leave there and call for the doctor. And the doctor would rarely be thirsty himself. So anyway, he arrived out and he looked down at
He
me.
was drinking also.
He looked down at Jimmy Neal on the ground. How are you, Jimmy? Huh? I'm not good at all, doctor. I feel a fluid going down my thigh, and I'm praying to God 'tis blood. They were simple kind of
That
days.
could be true.
That was true.
Michael, would they have excuses then? Would they make up excuses why they'd want the whiskey? Would they not admit to drinking it?
I
Mrs. Byron.
understood. There was a lot of people
What
coming to
about, do
me
you
for
remember
drink.
Mrs. Byron? She sent down the tin for the message.
Yeah, before my time, that would
Yeah.
be with my mother.
I'm sure,
I
I'm sure
remember
my
my grandfather Michael was a publican in Yall, you know, Tom Howland. And I remember this as a young kid, and the women would be coming in and they'd be looking for the baby powers or the nagging, and they'd be baking. And my grandfather saying, "Nah, they're shagging bacon every day."
I know, that was like 2 minutes come
But
in.
that was, yeah,
It was usual for people to come in and drink together. 2 minutes come in, and they'd usually start with a drop,
Yeah.
2 drops each, and then should be the second man's turn. And the fella the drop was maybe 1 and 3pence, a shilling and 3pence.
Yeah.
And the small bottle there was no large bottles even in those days, not a mind drop. And the small bottle would be maybe a shilling,
Oh, it's a small bottle of half pint, yeah.
a half pint.
Yeah.
And so there was 3pence difference, and that made it. Now the fella that had bought first would be trying to spare the man now buying the 3pence. So
Yes.
he'd say he'd have a small bottle, and there'd be an argument go on for a couple of minutes, 5 minutes maybe sometimes. Oh, you want it? You do want it? You will have it. Do you know, the fellow that was buying was trying to convince the other fellow to agree to have the drop again.
Yes.
Then they'd be level, and then they'd go in the small bottles. But
But apart from the kind of small bottle, you had a lot of kind of famous people who subsequently became famous, like Molly Keane, and was your man Gregory Peck in the pub.
well, my father said he was, that when he was
Yeah.
making Moby Dick inside Niall, that he came out with. So he claimed that there was everyone here. John Fitzgerald Kennedy stayed in Lismore Castle. Frank Astaire, you sent down. Frank Astaire was married
Fred
to...
Astaire,
Fred Astaire was married to one of the... Who was he married
The
to?
Cavendish, yeah.
He
Sure,
was-
Kennedy's sister.
Oh, yeah.
Kennedy's sister was married to a Cavendish as well.
That's right.
That was
yeah.
the connection.
Well,
there.
Fred Astaire used to send down for lobsters and come down and collect them. I often remember we'd have lobsters in a box at the pier, and he paid well.
Yeah.
And whether he was in the bar, he might come down
Has
himself.
his
He
family-
often stayed in Lismore Castle.
But sure, Molly Keane then would have been a good friend of the family, was she?
Well, I don't know so much about it. I wouldn't be I wouldn't be as party to their friendships as you are now with all your connections on the river. Meeting the Duke every now and then.
Yeah.
I'm sure Molly was. Sure, all those Anglo-Irish people were a clique.
Yeah, and still are.
And some of the Irish were sent over to be educated in English by the Benedictines, including my brother-in-law, so they could get an English accent.
That was how they'd slot into the New Ireland. Well, they didn't know whether
Oh, he should have
whether the revolution would work or not, I suppose.
The Benedictines are in Glenstall as well, so some of them they stopped sending him to England. 3 Benedictine colleges, and sent him up to Glenstall in the hope of making a superior gentleman out of them, including my nephew. Who barred
There's
me
big
from-
changes in the place, Michael. I mean, going back when we were kids, you had all the, like your father included, everybody had a kind of a foot in the boat as well as everything else. And now it's just on its last legs.
Yeah, well, the government took away the licenses to fish, drift net fishing for salmon 15 years ago. Gave them very meagre compensation for a lifetime's, for something a profession they'd spent 40 or 50 years practicing.
It was multi-generational.
Down through the
Is there
years.
anything else to say here? Would you mind if we went into the pub? We should
I
have a few
don't
shots
mind
inside.
at all, I don't care.
Are we okay for
Where you
time,
go,
James?
I don't know whether I'm coming across.
What I'd like to know, Michael, just turn around. So, how many brothers and half sisters did your father have in Tunnels Falls?
6.
So,
My grandfather was born in 1846 in November, out in Ballintaylor, out there to the right of the Drum Hills there, near Welsh's Cross. And Billy Evans' grandfather made a suit for him around in 1870 when he was heading for America.
did he bring a woman with him or did he find one out?
He brought his wife with him. She was a Welsh woman from Ring. There was a lot of controversy about the family in later years. The Braddocks, as they were known in Ring. But he was married to her, as far as I know. And his mother went to America with him, out of Ballintaylor. And he ended up 100 miles west of Boston in a town called Tunnels Falls around the 1870s. And I remember he was born before the height of the Great Famine. And he made his money anyway, some way. There was O'Reilly's there before him, because I saw John Riley buried there in 1818 in Tunnels Falls. He put up a great big Celtic cross and he buried people that died in the hotel. No one knew who they were. I mean, you must remember it was frontier country nearly.
Was it on the way?
He threw them all into the same grave, big grave he had in Tunnels Falls Cemetery, and a big huge Celtic cross he put up over him, and there was a John Riley buried there in 1818, so he must have been there when it was really frontier country.
Was it a big enough town, Michael, at the time?
It was. There was Avenue A and Avenue B. They never bothered naming him any street. It was a big town, as big as Dungarvan anyway.
Right.
And he decided to come home to Ireland. Like the rest of us, he valued Ardmore. And he came back in 1805 for a visit. And
1905.
1905, sorry David. And he went up over in the Fuges lawn. Fuge was a local landlord. The Fuge is buried up there in the cathedral going back to 1700. They're down in a big vault there. The flagstone is in the middle of the aisle. But anyway, Fuge, he went up on the lawn to have a better look at Ballyquin House. It was for sale at the time. A Father Welsh was living in it. It was a poor house. It was built a Georgian house. So Fuge came out and ordered him off his lawn. And my grandfather was 6'6" about, maybe an inch or two short of it. And when he died, my father tried on his overcoat, but it swamped him, he told me. And my father wasn't a small man. But anyway, he got off the lawn. He went up to Ballybrusa to visit a woman who was born 4 years after him in Welsh's Cross, my great-grandmother. She'd married my great-grandfather, obviously, a blacksmith, went to Padlars, just down from the school in Grange, Ballybrusa, the forge, the Flint's forge. And my great-grandmother had got married, of course, 30 years before that, and she had a daughter, my grandmother, who was born she was about 20 or 22 years at the time. So she saw him, and as her youngest sister Nora told me, nothing you do her but to go out and work in the hotel in America when she saw him. And he was 58 years at the time. She was 20. I think his wife may have died. My father said she killed herself with a drink. And he had 4 sons and 2 daughters in Tunnels Falls with her. and one of them had, it was known as, there was a canal around the waterfall, Turner's Falls waterfall, and a man had fallen into the canal one day, and one of his sons had jumped in after him and drowned himself. I was told his name too when I went up there in 68 looking for the hotel. But anyway, my grandmother went out to work in the hotel when he went back, and as did her brother, Pats, the Yank as we called him. But he fell out with my grandfather in no time at all. He wandered all over America. He was a cowboy in Texas, going around on a million-acre ranch in 1905 with a bullwhip and a revolver killing rattlesnakes. He was a hotel porter in Florida. He was a submarine builder in Philadelphia and during the First World War. And he was working in the big country club in Chicago making hooch in Prohibition. My Aunt Biddy in 68 brought me into this huge deserted place where all the multi-millionaires had their country club. It was as long as the street here in Ardmore. And derelict, empty. You could walk through the length of it in 1968, as indeed the hotel in 68 when I went up to Turner's Falls, and the hotel was derelict and empty, and I went through it and had my photographs of myself taken outside it 3 weeks before they pulled it down. But anyway, my grandmother married him in 1910, just before they came back to Ireland, and they were married. Remember, he was 37 or 8 years old, and as they said in Turner's Falls, his grandchildren by the first marriage. Johanna Riley was their mother, O'Reilly. They said Smiling Mike, as they called him. He was a wicked man for the women, street angel and a house devil, as his daughter said, or his granddaughter said to me.
Can I stop you 1 second? Did your father ever meet his brothers?
No.
Or his sisters?
He met his half-aunt in 1973 or 74. Johanna Riley was the youngest of the 6 children in Turner's Falls by the first wife, and she married a man called Dolan, and she had a daughter who came here with her husband, who was an insurance executive in Hartford, Connecticut. That was the centre of the insurance industry in America. When I spoke to her in 68, they wanted, come down to Hartford, but you're working in insurance. My husband is high up on it. I hadn't a notion of staying in America working for an insurance company. And anyway, she met my father inside on the sofa. My mother served us tea. Her husband was with him, William Starkey. She was Mrs. Starkey, obviously. She had a very good-looking daughter, I remember. I stayed with her in 74 when I went out there, 75 in Hartford. But Liz was inside washing her head, her hair, she was about 18 or 19, my sister, in a basin of water. And she was listening to things, but she wouldn't come near her. Obviously, Liz was prickly out. So, anyway, Liz came out with her hair piled up on her head and a towel around it, looking at herself in the mirror inside in the room while they were having tea on the sofa.
Kettles, yeah.
And she turned around and said to the woman, my father's half-aunt, no, her mother would be my father's half-aunt. No.
Her mother would be her father's half-sister?
A cousin, half-cousin. Her brother was my half-first cousin.
Right.
One of the attorneys in Turner's Falls. So Liz turned around and she said to the woman, what are you staring at, she said. You could imagine. Oh, I'm looking at you, you're so good looking. Said the woman to her, Liz had a very good bone formation, like, you know, and the hair was piled up in her head. And that mollified Elizabeth a bit, but she stalked off back into the kitchen. And that's the only time he met any of them.
Jeez.
John Dole and her brother, big attorney, and the two of them were, the two brothers of this woman, Johanna Riley's children, yeah. One of them was a Harvard graduate in law. They had a big practice in Turner's Falls and another in Springfield. But John was down in Kerry. He was married to a Kerry woman called Flaherty, well, she'd been born in America, but all the people came out from Kerry. And he was down in Kerry with his 2 youngest sons. He had 6 children too. But he was heading for Ardmore, but one of the youngest sons, that was his excuse anyway, to meet me. I had met him a few years before, 68. He was coming to Ardmore, but one of the sons had asthma and the damp air of Kerry, and he flew back to America. That was his excuse. He was fed up of being in Ireland anyways. They never believed in moving much. They hardly moved out of Turner's Falls or Springfield. Sorry, I'm rambling. And it's very hard to follow the sequence.
I don't be he'd follow Jimmy's funeral
Yeah.
or some other.
Or maybe what about the blacksmiths and maybe? Or would you like to talk about the blacksmiths and the Kush and all that?
Oh yeah, well sure, my grandmother her father was a blacksmith. They used to buy a ton of coal for 10 shillings for the forge. And in those days, and they'd have coal when other people had coal for the fire. There was 2 or 3 around house there, so still standing. William Mansfield owns it now, your first cousin. And Jim Mansfield bought it off him.
The business was so good at the time they had to have the 2 forges, didn't they? Like one
Oh
was,
well, they had one over at Narnagarten, as they called it, Cush.
yeah, the main one.
And there was an anvil. No, the main one I'd say was in Ballybruce. That's where they had the bellows and
Okay, yeah.
and the anvil and the fire. I don't know really. There was an anvil in front of that small house in Cush, with the walls 2.5 feet thick and the zigzag chimney.
Yeah.
And there was an anvil and a heap of horseshoes lying around the anvil when I was young, and I'd be going over there 5 or 6 years of age, 1948, 49, 50, 51. I mean, my great grandmother, I was at her funeral in 1950. She was born in 1851, so she was 99 years and 9 months when she died. But her grandfather, her father, lived in 3 centuries. He was born in 1792 and he died in 1902 at 110 years of age, out in Welsh's Cross. Dennis Devine, there's Devines living there still, descended from him.
Good God.
And when he was 100, my great grandmother was his daughter, Mary Devine. She married Padlar Flynn in Ballybruce. And my grandmother was born of that union. But when he was 100 years of age, he walked in from Welsh's Cross to Ballybruce to visit his daughter, who lived to be 100.
Okay, Dad.
And they wanted him to stay the night. No, he walked back again that evening. And that's only when he was 100. He lived to be 110. As I say, he lived in 3 centuries. 1792, he saw the 1798 rebellion when he was 6 years of age. And he died in 1902.
And might before we leave Grange, whose funeral was it? Do you remember when Alan Armstrong was over? And
That was my aunt.
Was it Molly?
I don't think so.
Biddy.
I think it was Biddy.
It was, yeah.
It was Biddy. I buried Biddy with her father and her mother and Molly.
Yeah, but remember we had a board meeting here first.
Well, I didn't want to be digging up I didn't know where my father and I have 6 graves in the new cemetery, Tony.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't want to be digging one of them up. So I said Biddy'd be happy enough with her father and mother, above in Grange. And I had buried Molly there.
But do you remember we arrived up at it?
I do with the bottles of porter and a drop of whiskey for the Edgy Man and Black Meek. The 2 Morrissey brothers were digging the grave. They were traditional grave diggers for the Flynns.
Yeah.
Well, Bat Mansell was too. And Alan Armstrong was very highly amused at the 2 men I had digging the grave. They were real Irish.
Was there a skull became uncovered for
Oh
you
God
there?
almighty, I can't remember that too much.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Probably I shouldn't be digging up my people. But sure, look.
Tell us about when your uncle the priest died and you went over to the funeral over in England that time.
Oh, for God almighty. Yeah, sure. Well, I flew over with Paddy Kiley, the jockey and the horse trainer from 2 Mile Bridge, and his wife, my cousin, Maria O'Shea. Not Maria, Mary O'Shea. And they lived in 2 Mile Bridge. Father Jim, my uncle, the priest, he'd stay with them when he'd come home from England, from Yorkshire. He wouldn't stay over across the street at all. But his sister, I suppose, had to blame him. And I had a few drops of whiskey on the way over, and we went into he was being waked inside in his mistress's parlour. The parish priest was.
Was that apparent to the whole community, or was it just apparent to you?
It was obvious.
Right, right. Common enough in England, I
He
suppose.
wouldn't want to be very clever to figure that out.
Right.
Sure, he left her all his money,
Oh, fair enough.
every penny, and he was rich.
Okay.
A big Lexus every time he came home, driving over to your aunt and John Mansfield over in Old Parish to impress him. He used to be staring at your mother.
Oh my
Oh,
God.
not your father, not your mother. Annie Mansfield and Babe and Mary, the baby, and William Mansfield's mother, when he was a poor young fella studying for the priesthood, and they'd be parading up and down the village in all their finery of a summer's evening.
Did it bother you at all to see all the money going to the mistress? No, I suppose.
I didn't care, because people up in Lissarow were anxious for me to find out how much he left.
Right.
I didn't care too much. All I thought to myself ever about him was, he had all that money, and his sister was here, my mother, with 7 children on the side of the street, and damn few hundreds he gave her. Whereas my father's sister, that went to Chicago when she was 38, and was only cooking in a hospital there, where Muhammad Ali was going in children's hospital in Chicago for 30 years, until she retired at 65, all about. She was sent home thousands of dollars to us. And the priest said nothing. Anyway, we went in, and he was being waked in a coffin, up on 2 trestles in her front parlour, side in his coffin. And she gave me a glass of whiskey or a drop of whiskey when I went in, all right.
An English woman.
Or an English woman from Yorkshire, Nora McHale. Sure, Mick Casey has traced them all, sure. And I asked for a second drop of whiskey, and she wouldn't give it to me, but I didn't care, because I had bought an egg in the airport duty free or something on the way over, so I took it
Michael
out.
J with you?
No, I'll tell you about Michael J. Michael J was coming up from London on the train, and I was sent down to meet him. She said, "Oh, go down and meet him." And the nun was coming up from Worcester, Sister Callista, that had
She was Marianne
the Reverend Mother.
Mother.
She was headmistress, she was the Reverend Mother in this Mountbatten Hall school where Marianne Faithful was going to school as a boarder years before, and I said to her, you expelled Marianne Faithful. No, she says, we just advised them that it'd be better that she wouldn't return. Anyway, I went down to her. I meet her off the train with Peggy Power, her first cousin, who was Mary Reynolds, and Paddy Power was my mother's first cousin, you know, Big Paddy above in Lissarow. And I mean, my Meg, his mother was sister of my grandmother across the street, Mary Dave Flynn, my grandfather. But I said to the Reverend Mother when she got off the train, "Are you coming up to the wake in the mistress?" I didn't say the mistress, in Nora McHale's house. I said, I wasn't that blunt.
Yes, yes.
"Oh, I'm not going near that woman's house," she said. She knew. So herself and Peggy Power was with her first cousin, another nun, you see, from the convent. You probably know her. She's still alive, I think. They booked into a hotel, and Michael J must have come off the train too. Anyway, Michael J and me went up anyway, and we went. Nora McHale took over the whole thing. She was being brought to the church that evening, and the mistress had all her brothers and her nephews under the coffin. I wasn't even asked to go under the coffin. And I went down and we set up, and then Michael and me and the 2 nuns, I was told to look after Michael. All the Burkes, other side of the family, they were bankers and everything. She accommodated all them. She got her, but Michael and me and the nun, no accommodation. I had to pay for Michael and myself. I booked the room, sharing the room, and the 2 nuns were in another room. and Michael and me stayed drinking until about 1 o'clock. A bit of a wake for Michael's brother and my uncle. And we went to bed, and at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, Michael jumped out of bed and he pretended he didn't know who I was. He was a wicked gangster.
Right.
Get out of my house, Paddy! Get out of my house! He started roaring at me. But if he did, I got fed up with him, and I just hopped out as well, and I squared up to him and shut up, I said, for Christ's sake. And the nuns could hear all this.
Right.
And after, he did it twice, I think, as far as I know, and then he didn't realise 'twas en suite at all. He wanted to go to the toilet in, and I told him, I'll go to the door there. I says, there's a toilet down the corridor. And he did.
Into the nuns you went maybe?
No, he didn't. But he came back, and I had the door locked, and then he knew who I was. Leave me in, Michael. I wouldn't. I decided to teach him a lesson. He was annoying me. And he went down anyway, and he soon was able to tell the porter exactly who I was, and the porter came up, and when I heard him outside, I opened the door. And he quietened down after that.
What did he do for a living, that man? Jay?
Living the dole
Really?
all his life, I'd say. Well, very little. He was a brilliant man.
Right.
Oh, he could quote Latin at you. He was 3 years studying for the seminary.
Basically a
And to
chancellor.
be another priest
A chancellor.
in England. And he came out, and Father Jim bought him a Harley Davidson.
Jesus.
And he was on Yahoo Radio with Kit Fitzgerald one day, and he recited 3 poems: Hitler's Dream, The Face, and he stopped the people in Red Barn dancing. 2,000 people had stopped dancing when he'd get up on a chair, up on a table, and recite Dangerous Dan McGrew and The Face and the Cremation of Sam McGree.
See.
You ever there when he was there?
No, but I remember the short time ago, boys, an Irishman named Cassidy was elected to
That was Davies' poem, the brother's poem.
That was, yeah.
Short time ago, boys, an Irishman named Artie was elected to the Senate by a very large majority. He felt so elated, he said to his Dennis Cassidy, go over to the butcher and order up a ton of meat. And be sure the boys and girls have all they want to drink and eat.
That's it, yeah.
There was pigs, tails, snowballs and cannonballs. You go on forever, nonsense. Anyway, that's all I know.
Yeah.
But,
Have anything else, sir?
well, no, just let me finish
I
this.
saw you.
Michael, we were down in the deserted almost restaurant. The rest of them were gone. The mass wasn't until 11 o'clock, the burial mass. And the 2 nuns were sitting over from us, and they were looking daggers at Michael. They could hear him shouting and roaring, you see. And Michael, I remember you, Peggy, in Ardmore when you were 19, he says. You weren't so high and mighty then, like. Oh, jeez. He was going to start talking about her before she went into the nuns. He knew what to say.
Yeah.
Anyway, they went off up early to the thing, and Michael and me stumped up through the town. I think it was Dewsbury or somewhere. And all the Protestants had their shops closed and
Really?
lack of respect even. Yeah, a lot of shops. He was very popular, of course. A great man.
Right.
Bonamy,
Yeah.
great mixer. You remember him,
I
Tony?
do. I served mass for him, I'd say, one time.
And you probably got 10 shillings or a pound.
I got 7 and 6 anyway.
Oh, he was always cutting the big shape. And anyway, Michael J stumped up to the altar when we got to the church. We went in the door halfway, and I stayed down at the back. I had my radio with me, and I had 2 Roger Stores bags with my underpants in one and the radio in the other, and I stayed down in the middle of the church standing looking up at the altar, and there was about 38 priests up on the altar. They were giving them a big send-off. There was 2 bishops and about 3 monsignors and about 33 ordinary priests. And it's kind of celebrating. And Michael J was up at the top. And anyway, when the mass was over and they came down the aisle towards me, and the 33, I counted all I couldn't count them while they were on the altar because they'd be blocking each other out, but I counted them as they were down in front of the coffin, like. There'd be 2 bishops in front. And I counted them. And then the undertaker, when the coffin came, the undertaker rushed up to, her nephews and brothers were carrying the coffin again, of course, the mistress, Nora McHale. And the undertaker rushed up to me, "Get out of the way, you tramp," he says. Or words to that effect. And me with the 2 Rochesters back, I was going to join in the front with Michael J and the nun, they were the chief mourners.
Jesus.
Michael J rushed up, "He's my nephew! He's my nephew!" He said. The whole church could hear him. Oh, the undertaker nearly went through the ground. I had a place reserved, my humblest apologies, I had a place reserved for you up at the front, like, you know. And we went out, and the 2 bishops came up sympathising with the 3 of us, and I jumped 1 Rochester bag into the left hand. I had 1 in each hand, and I shook hands with him, and he was a great man, I said. And the Nora McHale was looking at me daggers, like. And she had 2 big limousines for me and Michael, and the nun were in the back of one of them. Chief mourners out to the grave. Out the burial was private. She was in another limousine, I suppose. And we went out, and he went down the grave, and Michael J gave 1 huge roar. "Goodbye, Father Jim! Goodbye, Father Jim!" Could be held across the valley. Michael J often told me that he'd be in court and he'd be going to get sent down for something he had done, living in his wits. Oh, I fell off at Ollie, he'd bring home things here, like when he'd be coming. And he'd be he'd ask the judge, "Could I get on the phone to Father Jim?" And you're both in Yorkshire, like. He was in London.
Just when you're talking about plastic bags there, Michael, I can't remember how many